You may have sung that song many times before, or perhaps this is the first time you've ever heard it. If you were with us last week, we ended our service singing that song together, but in a way we may have never considered it before, or even the concept of worship before. In just the first verse, we get a powerful declaration of who God is. He's a life giver, a creator. He is love in the purest form. He brings light into the darkness, a light that cannot be subdued. And he brings hope to the brokenhearted. Pastor Bryan Hughes started this new series, Origin, showing us how creation, God's masterful craftsmanship, shouts his praise, how the heart of who God made us all to be cries out in reverence of him. That in the act of creation itself, we can all discover the foundation of our purpose, a common origin. God made us to love us, and we were made to love and worship him. So today I want to continue on this path of our common origin with this line from the song. It's your breath in our lungs. This is taken directly from the book of Genesis, the very first book in the Bible. You can read it in chapter 2 as we see a more detailed description of God creating the first people, Adam and Eve. This is what it says. Now, no shrub had yet appeared on the earth, and no plant had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not yet sent the rain on the earth, and there was no one to work the ground. But streams came up from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground. Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. God transferred his breath into us. He is the breath in our lungs. And as we learned last week, the creation of all the heavens and the earth were done with you and me in mind, not in theory or an idea, but with us in mind specifically. That's our story. All of us have this in common, this beautiful reality that God chose to begin the lineage of mankind. A reality that has had us being a very good part of God's creativity. And I think most of us would be extremely proud to have sent out a DNA profile test like this one and find this connected genetic blueprint that links us to the people who had the privilege and honor to walk next to God in the midst of his creation. But early in those days of creation, Adam and Eve could not predict or see that there would be some twists and turns ahead. If you've ever taken one of these style tests, you most assuredly have found something that you didn't expect. In fact, a number of years ago, as the obsession grew with knowing where we came from, celebrities were asked to explore their heritage in a new show called Who Do You Think You Are? And like you and me, most of them hoped to find some heroes, some romance, and triumph in their family tree, and many did. Model Cindy Crawford, she found out that she had a connection to the Emperor Charlemagne. Actor Jim Parsons, who's best known as Sheldon in The Big Bang Theory, discovered a link to his great-great-uncle, a French royal architect that rubbed shoulders with Benjamin Franklin. And author J.K. Rowling discovered that her grandfather, a 35-year-old waiter in Paris, was commissioned to guard bridges in World War I, only to find himself in the battle of a lifetime. And after losing his commanding officers, he held the line against the Germans and received one of France's highest military honors. But for many actors, what waited for them was the shock of a lifetime. Actor Jesse Ferguson, finding out the reason that his grandfather was never mentioned in a conversation, was a huge shock to him. His great-grandfather had murdered a family member, beaten the rap, and then gone on to commit more terrible crimes. From actors to cooking show hosts to comedians, many found out the secret that had long been buried in their family's past. And as I watched the clips, I saw the pain and disappointment, the shame reflected on their faces and in their words. And I started to think, we We all have to have at least that one scandal in some obscure branch of our family tree in our past. If researchers really looked hard enough, they could find something salacious to put on display for all of us, something that would drive up the ratings. If researchers really wanted a story, well, it's been here in print, in words, in the Bible for thousands of years. Common in our history is the beautiful splendor of the Garden of Eden, the creation of a master's hand, where man and woman, Adam and Eve, would be fruitful and multiply, where there was never a need to be hungry, where the creatures, the birds and the fish of the world were cohabitants in a safe and loving relationship with mankind. It was marvelous, beyond our comprehension, the perfect plan of a loving God, until it wasn't. See, somewhere between chapter 2 of Genesis and chapter 3, we lose the timeline. It seems like one minute everything is perfect. God has just put everything in order, and then suddenly a decision that will affect every human life is made. Not by God, but by Adam and Eve. We don't know how long our ancestors enjoyed the bliss of their new life. There's no account of how long their peaceful lives were spent walking in the garden with God, enjoying the beautiful place that God had set up for them. We simply don't know how long that lasted. But what we do know is the scandal that ends it all. The scandal in everyone's history, the first broken branch in our family tree that leads to a broken world. Adam and Eve had only one limitation in their beautiful garden. There was a tree next to the tree of life called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And here's what God says about that tree. He says, "And the Lord God commanded the man, 'You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die.'" One thing that they could not touch or eat, one fruit among thousands that God wanted to protect them from, one fruit that brings death, and so much more. Eve was deceived by the serpent, convinced that God was keeping something from her and her husband, and that the fruit that was forbidden held the key to that secret. So she ate the fruit, gave some to Adam, and he ate it. And then they were aware that they were naked, afraid of God, and with good reason, because this act led God to banish them both from paradise, kicked out of the garden. We call this moment in our common origin the fall, or the fall of man. You may have heard original sin or different statements like that. If you've been around our church for a while, you may have heard us say something like this: we live in a broken world, and we broke it. And we almost exclusively go back to this moment of failure by Adam and Eve as the start of that brokenness. And God's plan for us all was a boundary, a place that wasn't meant for us. And Adam and Eve crossed that boundary. And since that day, we have been habitual line crossers. The Bible shows the pattern of all of humankind pushing the boundaries, the lines that God has placed in our lives for our protection. To this day, in all of our lives, we struggle with this. And I believe it's because we inherited something in that original disobedience. I believe we inherited this, that I want is greater than I need. I want is greater than I need. Adam and Eve had everything they could ever need. Nothing was left to chance. Can you imagine if you had everything that you ever needed and that you were blissfully unaware that you were missing anything? Think about your utopia for a minute, your perfect place, the perfect companionship, perfect provisions. Now, for all of us, it may not be a garden. For me, it would be an island with a beautiful breeze. My wife, Michelle, by my side, a cabana in a cove with beautiful blue water, so clear that you could see all the fish. Beautiful island music playing, food that never had to be cooked, dishes that never needed to be cleaned, great conversation, and Hey, don't worry, guys. This is a PG island, and our kids would be there. Well, maybe they have their own island, and they would come over and we would have fun together. And they would always listen to my advice. And they would always beg to hear my dad jokes. It's kind of fun to think about it, but even my island paradise is packed with what I want, not really what I need. Even if I try to describe perfection in my own mind, it comes up short of what God would want from me, because what He planned never included what I want. But what I want can often be disguised as what I need. And that leads us to compromise. Compromise leads to failure. Failure leads to pain and often shame. For Eve and her husband, that shame was instantaneous, something that had immediate consequences. And as I said earlier, the cycle of brokenness wasn't confined to that one mistake. So what can we do? Are we doomed because of the sins of great-grandma Eve and great-grandpa Adam? Can we just throw up our hands and say, if only they hadn't eaten that fruit? Can we just claim that Adam and Eve made us do it every time we sin? We can't, hardly, because we know the truth. We're responsible for our own decisions. Paul, the apostle who wrote a good portion of the New Testament of the Bible, wrote these words in the book of Romans. He says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." Our origin may include the first sin that opened the door to other sin. But that first sin is not the reason I choose to sin or fail to make the best choices I can to grow closer to God, because my brokenness is my responsibility. My brokenness is my responsibility. This statement can sound frank and unfeeling. I really don't mean it to. Most of us have experienced some trauma in our lives, and for some, that trauma has been a lifelong battle. So I can attest firsthand that all of our brokenness is not our fault. And I want you to know, if you're struggling through that right now, that God sees those things that have happened, and I'm sorry that you've experienced them. But it's up to us, it's up to you to break the cycle. A friend was helping me through a really tough time in my life when he made this statement to me. He said, sometimes the shortest path to the light is to turn back and walk through the darkness. And honestly, I thought to myself, that sounds like a bunch of baloney. Going backwards is not moving forwards. I'm on the move. But as I processed it, it started to make sense. Unresolved or unaddressed issues in my past would always follow me. So if I never work on the root causes of my brokenness, whether it's my doing or not, the darkness is always right behind me, hoping for a chance to surface again. I'm the product of generational alcoholism, a parent and a grandparent that struggled. My family history of alcoholism doesn't give me the permission to keep drinking. I have a parent that caused me to have great issues in my self-worth, but that doesn't mean that it has to stay that way, because my worth can be defined in my relationship with God. I have physical abuse in my childhood and in my past that for a long time made me question every relationship in my life. But I can trust that with God's guidance and help that I can heal and focus on how I can model a good relationship, a healthy relationship for my children. More importantly, those things are not the reason for every poor decision in my life. They're not the reason for every sin I've committed. I can't undo the things that have happened in my past, but I can decide that from here on out, my decisions will not be self-destructive or cause pain and problems to other people in my life that I love, because my brokenness is my responsibility. So regardless of the cause of our brokenness, we can take responsibility to start the healing, because broken people need healing. And I think it starts by doing this, by admitting that this isn't working. admitting this isn't working. My son was helping me work on a truck recently, and we were taking the bed of the truck off, and I kept jamming this tool into a space it wouldn't fit to get a bolt out. And after many failed attempts, my son Haven took over and tried the exact same thing, and he failed a few more times. And so finally, after I had taken back over and attempted for another 15 minutes to loosen this bolt, I said, man, this isn't working. And my son, in his great wisdom, said, yeah, Dad, no joke. But we kept trying the same thing over and over again because it's what we knew how to do. We had not yet decided that we were wasting our time. Brokenness in our lives can work the same way. We may have something that we've applied to it like a fix to get us through it. That fix could be avoidance. It could be denial, or it could be poor choices and sin. It could be something that gives us temporary pleasure or temporary painlessness or temporary empowerment, but it never really repairs the issue. At some point, we have to look in the mirror and say, this isn't working, and the problems are still here. Jesus was teaching one day when he told a story about a son who had made some tough choices in his life and these choices had separated him from his family. You may have heard it called the parable of the prodigal son. And in the story, the young man's consequences grew more dire with almost everything that he tried. Eventually, he finds himself craving the same food that the pigs that he is employed to care for are eating because he is so very hungry. In the book of Luke, this is what it says. It says, when he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have enough food to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. Translation, this isn't working. I can't stay here. Look, whatever you're facing, whatever you're carrying, whatever mistakes you have made or are still making that are separating you from God, it starts by admitting that what you're doing isn't working. We know we need grace. We need direction. We know that we don't have it figured out. And if we admit that this isn't working, that should lead us to want to commit to take action. This is a second step. We commit to all kinds of changes in our lives. Some of us want to eat healthier, so we plan our meals and prepare food in advance. We read labels and study articles. Others want to exercise more, maybe lose some weight. I'm included in that group. So we join a gym, we buy a treadmill, we might even hire a trainer. You might get excited about a new hobby, so you research the equipment needed, videos on YouTube, and you might even take a class. And all of those things involve thought, a plan, and work, and even support. But when it comes to the realization that our brokenness has a hold on our lives, we may realize that something needs to change, but we don't apply the same kind of commitment. We don't always commit to the work. I help lead our recovery ministry here at PCC. And in recovery, we're all in different stages, but as we work through the program, we reach what we call step 4, the inventory. A place of self-examination, a look back that leads us to literally writing down both good and bad things from our past. The writer of Lamentations says it like this. He says, let us test and examine our ways. Let us turn back to the Lord. So looking back at what went well and what we are struggling with will help us to see that this word turn right here is the beginning of the action and commitment that you need to take. Now, I don't want to oversimplify it here. Facing brokenness and sin in your life is not easy, but turning to God for guidance, well, that's necessary. And it will inform practical steps that you need to take. Your action could be a lot of different things. Maybe you need to have a conversation with your spouse, or maybe even confess something that has come between you. It could mean finding a recovery group like the one I help lead here. Your action could even involve you in forgiving someone who has hurt you so that you can move forward. It may involve you reaching out to a pastor for guidance or even deciding it's time for counseling. In reality, it could be a combination of two or more of these things. And ultimately, I believe when we take actions necessary, that we will be free to pursue God in everything we do. To pursue God in everything that we do. The blessing of creation at the beginning, before sin entered the world, was the promise of a never-ending connection with God. Adam and Eve didn't have to make time for God. Their time was for God. But when other things became an option, a relationship with God became a choice. So the intensity of that pursuit then falls to our discretion. So it's up to us to break the cycle that started that day in the garden. See, Eve had one distraction, one voice convincing her in a handful of moments where she wasn't focused on God, that there was something more for her, that she was missing something that would benefit her and her husband. But you and I are so far removed from the Garden of Eden, we have to rely on artists' renderings of it to even imagine it. We have so many things competing for our time, so many voices trying to sell us on something, distract us, entertain us, promote us, and yes, even separate us from what we know is right. But Jesus worked hard to make it simple for us. This is what he says in the book of Matthew. He says, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all of these things will be given to you as well." God's plan in Eden was to give us all that we needed, but above all was to give us himself, a relationship with our God. When God is the center of our lives, everything we do is informed by that relationship. When we make mistakes or fall back into our brokenness, we understand more quickly that we cannot stay there, and in seeking his grace, we return to him. Eventually, what happens is we start to minimize those moments of weakness, knowing that true freedom lies not in always choosing what we want, but what he wants for us. The beginning of all creation starts in a perfect garden, a place of freedom, a place where a simple and meaningful relationship with God provides all of our needs. And in the last book of the Bible, there's a promise of the restoration of that place, the garden itself, the perfection of its design. But we don't have to wait until that day. We don't have to hope for heaven and a new garden. We can pursue it right now. Jesus taught his disciples to pray, and in that prayer, he said, "My prayer is that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven." His prayer was for the kingdom of heaven to be lived out here on earth, and it will take all of us to work towards making that happen. Our ancestry profile report includes prone to sin and brokenness as part of our DNA, from the very first two people on earth until today. But what would happen if we broke that cycle? If we all owned our brokenness, we took responsibility and decided to pursue God like it was intended in the beginning. Families would be healed. Our relationships, all of them, would be fuller and more meaningful. We'd be more thankful for what it is that we have and focused on the needs of others. We would strive to be more like Jesus in every waking moment, knowing we could get back to the place where it all began, in this life, right now. As the band plays, we invite you wherever you are to sit and reflect on your own relationship with Jesus. Reflect on what these words mean. and what this kind of pursuit of God might look like in your own life. Consider as we hear these words how we all can have the promise of tomorrow right now, today, if we would just take hold of it.
God, take us back, the place we began, the simple pursuit of nothing but you, the innocence of a heart in your hands. God, take us back. God, take us back to unswerving faith in the power of your name, a heart beating for your kingdom to reign, a church that is known for your presence again. God, take us back. Nothing and no one comes close to you. Nothing could ever come close. Nothing and no one, it's you and you only. Nothing could ever come close. Keep our hearts real. Keep your grace close. You're bringing us back. You're bringing us home to an unswerving faith in the power of your name, a heart beating for your kingdom to reign, a church that is known for your presence again. God, take us back. Nothing and no one comes close to you. Nothing could ever come close. Nothing and no one, it's you and you only. Nothing could ever come close. Nothing and no one comes close to you. Nothing could ever come close. Nothing and no one, it's you and you only. Nothing could ever come close.
We don't have to wait for heaven and the hope of a new garden. We can pursue it right now. Let's break the cycle, own our brokenness, and pursue God like it was intended in the beginning. To help you with that pursuit, I've put together a 5-day guide to help you draw closer to God with some actions that you can take right now this week. You can find that on our website, or you can text PURSUE, the word pursue, to 94,000 to get it right now. And we're here for you. I, as well as the rest of our pastoral team, are here to meet with you, to help you own that brokenness and move past it. Just reach out this week. Thanks for being here with us today, and we'll see you right back here as we continue the Origin series.